Section 70 is an interesting revelation. From the section heading, it seems that it's all about printing of the Doctrine and Covenants, or originally known as the Book of Commandments. However, it's much deeper than that. There are some concepts taught in Section 70 that not many church members adequately or fully understand, and I'll talk about those in this pre-class video. First of all, it did come about, Section 70 did, because they had held this conference to print Joseph Smith's revelations together in a wonderful book called the Book of Commandments. That book was only partially printed, stopped by the mobs in Missouri, so they never fully finished printing the Book of Commandments. It later is reprinted and called the Doctrine and Covenants. And notice here what it says in the section heading. I'd call your attention here to what this conference said, that they were worth, these revelations were worth to the church, the riches of the whole earth. And I like what Joseph Smith says here, that the revelations of the Book of Commandments, or now the Doctrine and Covenants, they are the foundation of the church in these last days. As you can see in verse 1, speaking of printing this Book of Commandments, it's going to bring up a number of people's names: Joseph Smith, Martin Harris, Oliver Cowdery, John Whitmer, Sidney Rigdon, and W.W. Phelps. These were the men who had been appointed by the church to work full-time in doing the church's business, and who were put in charge of printing the Book of Commandments and overseeing this laborious work to bring this book to come to pass. Somebody had to edit it, somebody had to typeset it all, somebody had to press it all. And that's what these guys were doing. Which brings up one of the more interesting points of Section 70. To talk about that context, let me show you this. The other day I was in Deseret Book and I walked past and I saw this little thing there, the 17 points of the true church, and it's a missionary tool, and most of us have seen this. And on this card, if you flip it over on the reverse side, it lists 17 things that the true church of Jesus Christ must have in order to be true. Well, I picked it up when I was looking at it, and one of them caught my attention. And it was the one that said that there should be no paid ministry in the true church of Christ. So, true or false question for you, dear viewer. True or false? There should be no paid ministry in the true church of Jesus Christ. Well, you already know where this is going. The answer to that is going to be false. And let me talk about what I mean and how it's related to Section 70. Noting that all the full-time work that many of the brethren were doing to print the Book of Commandments, Joseph Smith brings up a sensitive question. And he says, as you can see here, quote, "We may have claim on the church for recompense," meaning if they're going to work full-time for the church, their full-time job, their full-time employ, then the church needs to take care of them temporally and financially. And a lot of Section 70 as a whole, I would say Section 70 deals with this delicate issue. Not just of printing the Book of Commandments, but on paying for the living expenses of working full-time church leaders in church businesses, such as printing the revelations of the Doctrine and Covenants. And that comes about, by the way, earlier in the revelations of the Doctrine and Covenants. Notice here in Section 51, this is revelation regarding the practice of having all things common. And to Bishop Edward Partridge, look what the Lord says right here. "And again, let the bishop appoint a storehouse unto this church, and let all things, both in money and in meat, which are more than is needful for the wants of this people, be kept in the hands of the bishop." We're familiar with that, but look at 14. "And let him," that's Bishop Partridge, "also reserve unto himself for his own wants, and for the wants of his family, as he shall be employed in doing this business." In other words, Bishop Partridge could pull from the storehouse of the church to take care of his family temporarily, as he administered the law of consecration by having all things common. If somebody asked today, technically, could we pay our bishops? I would say the answer is probably yes, if those bishops were asked to work full-time for the church and leave their full-time employ. That's what happens, by the way, even today. There are a few full-time callings, such as an apostle, being a member of the first quorum of the 70, that requires them to leave their full-time employment, often at great sacrifice, by the way, I would add. And then note here, persons in these situations, quote, "receive a modest living allowance provided from income on church investments," and that's out of the Encyclopedia of Mormonism. So as you study Section 70, I'd invite you to see what the Lord teaches about this concept of when is the laborer worthy of his hire, both spiritually and temporally, and the insights that the Lord provides about that concept in Section 70 of the Doctrine and Covenants.